Karen, can you hear me from Zoom?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I just want to make sure that we had this audio test so before we begin. So that's good that I can hear you and you can hear me.
I can hear you really well. It sounds great.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to put us on mute for a little bit until we start.
Okay.
Call this workshop to order. Before we start, I know Karen Francois had knee surgery and she won't be here to attend, but I believe she told me she was coming in through Zoom. And I don't know, is she gonna speak to us?
Yes,
Go ahead, Karen.
You know, last minute I did want to actually just say a brief opening. Um, Thank you, Commissioner Ortega, Commissioners, County Manager O'Connor, Director West, and Deputy Director of our esteemed elections department. I am grateful to have the opportunity to talk about this particular issue because at one time or another, each one of you has either come to me or County Manager O'Connor with concerns about this. So I'm grateful to be able to join you by Zoom. I know that Tracy and Dave Triplett will do an excellent job explaining this issue to you. So now I'd like to turn it over to Director West.
Thank you, Karen. So good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
So my name is Tracy West. I'm controller of IPR, but recently I've also taken on the responsibility of interim director of property tax records, election services, and county auditor treasurer. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to learn more about the voting systems and how Ramsey County reports results on election night. So Deputy Director David Triplett and Elections Manager Christina Tweeden have worked really hard on this presentation. So thank you to them. And I will hand it over to Deputy Director David Triplett to lead the presentation.
Thank you, Tracy. Commissioner Ortega, rest of the commissioners, thanks for having me here today. It's always good to see you. I think we come here about once a year to talk about elections, and maybe in 2024 we'll come a few more times because that will be a very busy year. I believe we've done introductions, but the rest of the agenda for today's workshop, we'll go over the purpose of the workshop. Then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about our voting system and any other questions you might all have. And then we'll end today's workshop about our next steps in managing and operating our voting system. So again, the purpose of the workshop today is to inform the public as well as yourselves about the voting system we use in Ramsey County. We use this voting system in all state, federal, and local elections. And this workshop is a continuation of past workshops we've had on election-related issues going back to 2019. I think we started with voter engagement. We had a workshop in 2020 about our COVID response. We've had a workshop on redistricting. And then last fall, we met with you all about implementing the Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act to implement language services for Hmong-speaking residents. And so this is just a continuation. Like I said, we'll probably come back for more topics as you ask or as we believe you should be informed. All right, well, let's dive into it. I think as elected officials, you probably have some understanding of what a voting system is. If nothing else, on election night, you and your teams are probably hitting refresh to see the results, and that might be how you interact with the voting system. Voters interact with the voting system by casting a ballot, and Ramsey County staff interact with the voting system by managing it. So let's get into it. So what is a voting system? It's a physical and software-based system that creates ballots. It counts ballots. It provides accessible devices for voters, and then it also reports our election results. Voting systems do a few other things, but at a high level, those are the tasks that a voting system is performing. In Minnesota, the Secretary of State must certify the voting system before counties and municipalities can purchase it. And right now in Minnesota, there are 3 certified systems, and those are the 3 you see on the screen in front of you. Those are ES&S, Hart InterCivic, and Dominion. There's a few other ancillary items that the Secretary has certified for our use, but these are the 3 systems that are certified in Minnesota today. And then it's also designated as critical infrastructure. This was a new designation, I believe either in 16 or 2017, but that was a Department of Homeland Security designation, and that treats it as the same as our dams, our energy grid, all the other critical infrastructure required to run this country. Our voting system now meets that standard. And I'll get into what that means a little later in the security slides. But at a high level, that's what a voting system does, and those are the voting systems we have available to us in Minnesota today. So let's talk about the voting system we use here in Ramsey County. So in the state of Minnesota, the determination of who's going to use a voting system is up to the municipal city councils and then the county auditor has to approve the system that they're going to use. In Ramsey County, all our municipalities have chosen to use a voting system, and our auditor directs them to use the system that we have purchased. This system was purchased in 2015, and it's the Hart InterCivic system. We are one of 3 counties in the state that uses the Hart InterCivic system, and that was chosen by a task force made up of city clerks, school district staff, county staff, and that was the recommendation made to purchase the Hart system in 2015. Our current contract expires at the end of 2025, so part of the reason we're here today is to talk to you about prepping you up for a new purchase and starting this conversation, because we will need to replace the system in 2025, and depending on what replacement looks like, do we get a new system, do we upgrade our current system? We have a lot of questions to answer between now and then, but we would like to implement a new system in 2025. At that point, our current system will be 10 years old, and most of you aren't using 10-year-old technology, so I think you would understand with technology it does need to be replaced at times. So, but our current system is Hart InterCivic. As I said, there's 3 counties in the state using that system. There's about 4 using the Dominion system, and ES&S is the other 75-odd counties are using the ES&S system. And again, that's up to the local municipalities and the counties what system they choose to use. So what are some of the past systems in Ramsey County? For those of you who've been voting for many years, you've probably noticed your ballot hasn't always gone into the same ballot counter. Or maybe you didn't have a ballot, maybe you had a punch card. And then some of you might have even used lever machines. New York City used lever machines all the way up until the early 2000s. There's pictures of New York City election workers dragging those big lever machines down Broadway or Fifth Avenue, whatever it is in New York City. But in Ramsey County, we used optical scan machines previous to our current system. Our current system is what they call a digital scan machine. In the 80s and 90s, we used punch card machines. For any of you, if you ever come over to the elections office, we still have a few, and if you shake them, chads will fall out of them to this day. But that's the picture down there in the lower right hand. Before the 80s, lever machines. And you can see the two voters standing next to a lever machine there in the lower left-hand picture. And then in the early 1900s and previous, political parties printed the ballots and counted the ballots. And I'm not the Ramsey County historian. There's probably someone better than me to talk about what was done in Ramsey County in the 1800s and early 1900s. But there's a good picture in the elections office of the parties conducting their elections. And if you look into it, the parties used to do all that activity. But, so that's the history of voting systems that we've used here in Ramsey County. So who manages our voting system in Ramsey County? That's a shared relationship between the municipalities and the county auditor. And that relationship is described in state law. I'm going to get into the exact duties in the next slide, but a lot of those duties are described in state law, who's going to do what. We also have a joint powers agreement with all our municipalities to manage the system. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to lay out who's responsible for what? It pays for the licensing. It says who does logic and accuracy, who does preventative maintenance. The JPA was renewed in 2020. For those board members who were here in 2020, we renewed our voting system contract for 5 years, and we also extended the joint powers agreement with our municipalities for 5 years. To note, the school districts do not own the voting equipment. So in their elections, they technically do use the city-based equipments, and the cities negotiate that relationship with the school districts directly. But the school districts do not own any voting equipment. It's solely the county and the cities. So what are the roles? What does the county do versus what do the cities do? At a real high level, the counties are responsible for owning and managing the software used to print and count the ballots. Creation of the ballots is an auditor duty, so we have the ownership over the software to do that. We also own the high-speed counters for counting ballots that come through the mail or at early voting locations. We own the absentee equipment, and the county also owns the spare equipment, so if a city has a repair or needs to replace equipment, they go through our office for that. We also established the ballot board. This is not part of the voting system, but it's part of the joint powers agreement. The ballot board is the board of election judges from different political parties who accept and reject all the ballots that come through the mail and then count those ballots. The ballot board is a responsibility of the cities to carry that out. And again, we'll get into that later when we talk about how results are reported. But in Ramsey County, the joint powers agreement has centralized that duty into one ballot board. So in Hennepin County, you would have, however many cities they have, 20, 25, 30 cities. each with their own ballot board. In Ramsey County, we have one ballot board that's run by the county, except the city of Maplewood. They are the only city who operates their own independent ballot board. And state law does allow the city to do that. But otherwise, all ballot board activities are centralized at the county, and that's established in our joint powers agreement to manage the voting system. Because equipment is required to count all those ballots if you don't want to do it by hand. And what are the cities responsible? Well, they own the precinct equipment. The county does not own that equipment. They perform all the testing, they train their judges to use the equipment, and then they deploy the equipment on election day. And then finally, they provide us the results. They have the equipment, they got to get those results to us in the legal manner that state law says. For those commissioners who've been around long enough, you probably know we have contracts with our cities to carry out their election duties. So I'm sitting here saying the county does this and the city does this, but in Ramsey County, we have contracts with 12 of our municipalities. Excuse me, now it's going to be 13. There's going to be a 14th before you very soon here. But we have contracts with 14 of our cities to carry out these duties. So a lot of the slideshow, when you see city duties, that's actually being carried out by the Ramsey County Elections Office and the staff there under contract with 14 of our 16 municipalities.
Excuse me, David.
Sorry, just on this point, thank you, which are the ones that we don't have? I was just thinking that probably
Commissioner
all of mine-
Ortega, Commissioner McGuire,
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked which ones we don't have, because it's easier
Yeah,
to say who we
right,
don't
right.
have contracts
Yeah.
with. Currently, we do not have contracts with the city of Maplewood or the city of Lauderdale. And you just approved a contract with the city of New Brighton, and the city of Shoreview will have a contract before you in maybe 3 weeks. I think it's going through the agenda review process right now. And then we have contracts with all our school districts except the North St. Paul School District, which is Maplewood, North St. Paul, and Oakdale.
Thank you, that's interesting, yeah, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So, for example, Maplewood does not have a contract with us. They own their voting equipment. They maintenance it. They train their judges on it. They deploy it on election day, whereas we do that for all the other cities we have contracts for. So what are the features of a voting system? I've talked about who owns it, who does what, but what does it actually do? So again, it designs and prints ballots that conform with Minnesota state law. This is why our voting system has to be certified by the Secretary of State. We can't just go out and buy any system. Ramsey County has some really good tech experts. I've seen them present here before, and they could probably create a good voting system, but you got to go through the state. You got to buy one that's certified by the state. And what that guarantees is that the voting system is going to implement all our laws. As you all know, all 50 states have 50 different election laws, and we got to make sure our voting system operates under the laws here in Minnesota. The voting system will program the memory devices used to collect results at the polling place and report those results. One of those things is the cast vote record. You might have heard of that. Our system will create that. That's kind of a way to audit the voting system. We make that available to the public. Ballot counters on election day and at early voting locations. So the voting system is physically the counters you put your ballot into if you vote out your precinct on election day or at an early voting location. For voters who use the accessible device, which is the picture here, that's part of the voting system. So if you're marking using either the Braille, the headphones, whatever feature of the device you're using, it will conform with state law, and then it will allow you to accessibly mark a ballot and get that ballot put into the ballot counter. We have high-speed ballot counters for counting all the ballots that come through the mail. Ramsey County will see about 30,000 to 40,000 ballots through the mail in a normal election, but in 2020, we saw 160,000, and those all have to be counted, and we use high-speed counters for those. And then our voting system, one of the features of it is it's non-networked. It's one of actually the only non-network systems in the state. HART is the only truly non-network system, and what that means is it doesn't plug into the network jack that all your computers are hooked up to. It's one-way memory devices, and I'll get into that more in a slide here about our security of our system. But those are the general features of a voting system. So what resources does the county have to support our voting system? Well, there's a project budget that's funded through the Joint Powers Agreement that the cities will pay annually, and the Joint Powers Agreement says here's how the funding is set up, so it's designed to cover the costs of operating the voting system. Generally, that's anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 annually that we collect to operate the system. 2024 obviously will be more money because we have 3 elections in 2024. It requires 1 full-time staff person. We have a staff person. That's their only job in our office is to manage the voting system. We have 1 temporary and seasonal staff, and then we have up to 10 partisan election judges. There's actually a lot of activities with the voting system that you have to have a judge of each major political party to sign off on. And so that staff person has to manage those judges too. But you also need experience. You can't go to college. You can't get a certificate in managing a voting system. So our staff person who does this, we've got to train them. We've got to get them this expertise. And actually, our voting system vendor has joked that this Ramsey County staffer is probably the most experienced person with this voting system in the state of Minnesota, because very few people have to operate a voting system. And so you need a very highly skilled individual who has that nuanced experience. We have secure storage space. We have about 500 square feet of secure storage space to make sure our voting system meets all the standards that the DHS has indicated we have to follow. And then we get resources and help from the IS team.
You know, as we're going through this and doing the responsibilities and basically the checks and balances that are in place, which are extensive, obviously, for good reason, how does that work with, and I'll go with the city of Maplewood, it's in my district. Do they have all of those same things in place? They have to use the same equipment? So there's no difference in how they process them? So do we have one voting system in Ramsey County with Maplewood conducting their own? So that is it seamless, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Commissioner Ortega, Commissioner Reinhardt, yes, to answer your question, seamless would be the correct answer. We're all doing it the same. So for cities who have a contract with us or who do not, the auditor, the reason the law says that the auditor has to approve that is to bring consistency across the whole county.
Okay.
So that's the first step, is the auditor says, nope, we're all using the same system countywide. The second layer to that is state law says the auditor's office has to train the city clerks on all the election processes, but one of them is managing your voting system. So yeah, the city of Maplewood follows the same processes that anybody would use, regardless of if you have a contract with us or not. We work with them to, how do you secure your voting system? I don't want to give away where everything's secured, but Maplewood does have a secure space that limits the staff and has access to only staff who need to be there. They follow the same chain of custody, so when a piece of voting equipment leaves their custody, there's documentation of it and how it left and how they received it back, just like we would do at the county. So any city, they're still under the same state laws, they're still under the federal laws, and they do follow the same processes we do here in Ramsey County.
And so, and maybe you'll get into this as far as how the vote totals eventually end up with the Secretary of State. Do they all come through Ramsey County first, or is it all directly, they all come to the county, correct?
Commissioner Ortega, Commissioner Reinhardt, yes, they do all come to the county. I will get that in a upcoming slide here.
Okay.
But yep, all the results first come to the county, and that's required by state law.
Okay, thank you.
And then finally, the final resource the county provides to support the voting system is the IS security team is heavily involved in making sure that our voting system, even though it's non-networked, it still has to touch the network to send results, or it's technology. And we have a whole department designed to support the county's technology, and the IS security team has been a great resource for the elections office. So how do we secure our system? So Commissioner Reinhardt, this might get into what you're asking as well. But first, voting systems have to be certified to meet the election assistance committees, that's a federal body, their voluntary standards. The voluntary standards are voluntary. Once the state opts into them, then they're no longer voluntary. So Minnesota has opted into the voluntary standards, which now are enforceable. They're pretty robust and kind of technical, so I have a link here if you'd like to look into those further. But the Secretary of State's job when they certify a voting system, their job when they certify a voting system is to make sure it meets these voluntary standards. So technically, we shouldn't be able to purchase a system that doesn't meet these standards because the state has certified it to meet these. The second thing we do is, I had talked that it was designated as critical infrastructure in 2017. That gives us a lot of resources that we can now apply to our voting system. One of them is we're now part of the Elections Infrastructure Information and Sharing Analysis Center, otherwise known as the EAI-SAC. And you might have heard of the USI-SAC, and there's a few others. But basically, it's people with critical infrastructure. They share information. We get alerts if there's either an IP address we should be looking out for, or if there's a new I'm not a technical guy, but some new hacking out there, whatever the concern may be. The EAISAC shares that information to local election officials, and our IS support team is also part of that sharing network and gets those. Also, because we're a critical infrastructure, we were able to get DHS and FBI security reviews. So we did a cybersecurity audit in 2019 that went over all our cybersecurity stance, and we've implemented a lot of the suggestions that we could from that audit. We've also done physical security reviews of the elections office and our voting system with the FBI, emergency management, and maybe a few other stakeholders from the county. And if you were to come in the elections office maybe 4 years ago and come into it now, you'd see two very different offices. We have cages, we have audit logs, we have chain of custody, we have certain access for certain people to certain rooms, and so a lot of that has come from the DHS and the FBI security reviews. We have a partnership with our Office of Emergency Management and IS security team. I talked about that, but again, big support to those two teams. We really appreciate their help. We have a relationship with law enforcement. SPPD around election time will just send patrol units by our secure warehouse, and they'll monitor our locations. We operate in a non-networked environment. Again, none of our ballot counters have modems in them. Our towers where we program ballots are towers just plugged into the power supply. They're not networked, there's no modems. But we do have to talk to the Secretary of State to share the results. I'll get to that in a future slide. But IS Security has reviewed all our procedures for when we do have to touch the network to make sure things are a one-way, and that if a memory card touches the network, it never goes back into that safe environment. A lot of times we'll just smash it with a hammer. I don't know when the staff did that last, but that's the advice from IS Security is once you've used the memory device once, you destroy it. And then we have physical security precautions, limited access, monitored access, documented chain of custody. We have a secure warehouse. We have redundant off-site locations, so IS has our voting system at an off-site secure location. And then we always have a detail of sheriff deputies on election night. For those of you who've come to our office on election night, we have the big tent and everyone's returning their results to us, all the judges are, and we do have a sheriff's detail of deputies there to provide physical security and traffic control. We have hundreds of cars driving through the lot. At minimum, we gotta make sure we get all our stuff, but we also gotta make sure we keep all our election judges safe as they're making these returns. So how do we report our results on election night? I got two slides here. The first slide is really a high level. How does the state report their results? And then we'll get into what do we do here at Ramsey County. As you know, election results are unofficial until the abstract of results gets canvassed. I think a few of you have been, I know a few of you have been on the canvassing board, and I'm sure for the new members, you'll get an opportunity to serve on the canvassing board soon too. So all the results are unofficial until the canvassing board signs that abstract and makes it official. And usually that's held within 3 to 10 days after an election. Depending on the election, primary is 3 days, generally you have 10. But how do the results get to us? So as I said, municipal clerks are ultimately responsible for staffing their polling places and managing the voting system. So at the end of the night, once the polls have closed and once their ballot boards are complete, again, Maplewood's the only one with their independent ballot board, the clerks have to drive the materials to us. Ballots, rosters, but for this conversation, they're also delivering the memory devices that have the results on them. And they're actually not coming back as a card, they're coming back secured in the voting system under a seal that 2 judges signed off on that seal. We make sure the seal number matches before our judges break it open and pull out that memory card. The clerks generally get to our office within about an hour, hour and a half after their polls close, but state law does give them 24 hours. In my 20 years experience, I don't think we've had a clerk wait 24 hours. But in some jurisdictions in greater Minnesota, Cook County, it takes you a couple hours just to drive across the county. So we're lucky here in Ramsey County. We have good geography. None of our clerks wait 20 hours, but they could. They'd get a phone call from me after about 2 hours, though. Once the clerks get all their materials, they deliver to us. We then can deliver the results to the Secretary of State. So we can't move any quicker than our clerks move. The third bullet point says in 10 counties in the state, 10 counties allow their municipalities to transmit the results to the auditor. And those 10 counties are generally in the metro, but we are not one of them. Our clerks drive the results. And that was a determination made by the task force in 2015 when we purchased the HART system. The HART system is non-networked. It doesn't have modems. It can be adapted to have modems. We'd come back to you asking for a big cost if we were going to do that. And with the future system, we're going to solicit advice from a lot of folks, you being one of them, on what we want with our new voting system. But the current system, those results are hand-delivered by our clerks. Only 10 counties are transmitting from the polling place directly to the auditor, Hennepin County being one of them. But only 10 are doing that. Once the auditor, yeah.
Excuse me, David, is that why it took us longer on election night to get the results in?
Commissioner Ortega, yes. Generally, the reason Ramsey County, and there's some really good memes on Twitter about us now, we're about an hour behind our colleagues in Hennepin because of the fact that we can't move any quicker than our judges getting us. And in the next slide, I'm going to go over to some of the reasons what we're doing. What are we doing in between the polls closing and having the results hand-delivered to us? It was a suggestion of the Secretary of State for many years not to do modems. So part of our reasoning was we were following the advice of the Secretary of State not to transmit via modems. The current Secretary of State's office, which was the past one too, no longer advises counties of that. They want that to be a county decision, but their reasoning was security. You're putting all your results onto the network, transmitting them, making a couple of transmissions. But to answer your question, generally we start reporting about an hour behind, but you have 24 hours to report, and you can actually come back the next day because the ballot board can count absentee ballots through the mail for another 24 hours. So in 2020, we did our final report at about 11:30 at night. All the other counties came back the next day, counted some more, and added to the result. So one of our motivations at Ramsey is when we leave on election night, we want that to be the last result you see. We don't want you coming in the morning and saying, oh, the result increased by 200 or 1,000. It's never a lot, but there's always going to be some. So that's part of our reasoning is we don't leave until everything has been counted and everything's been returned to us.
Excuse me, David.
Yeah.
Do we keep the paper ballots to hand count in case of any disputes?
Commissioner Ortega, yes, we keep the ballots, the physical ballots you voted for recounts, audits. If there's an election contest, and state law says we have to keep those for 22 months after an election.
22 months.
Yep,
so the security issues with modems is it could be backed up by the paper.
Yeah, part of the concern, Commissioner, with modems, and again, the decision by the task force wasn't made probably for one reason, it was probably many. But there's examples of many counties, and I don't have to leave Ramsey to give you an example. 2018, a couple of you were commissioners then. We had an issue with reporting our results. I think it was in Roseville specifically. Actually, when I first became manager, one of the first things Ryan did was an audit of the voting system to make sure we would correctly report results again. Hennepin double reported their results, I think, in 2010 or 2014. It's been a while now. We want to be very cautious of our results before we report them. Once you put results out there, people believe them. If you have to pull them back and then re-report, like we had to do in Roseville in 2018, I think it was, we've put in processes in place, so we don't have to do that anymore. So the result you see on election night gives the voters the most confidence that this is the result. And in 2020, when we had a week to count election results after, if you remember, there was a court case that last week was tough because we had people at our office every day questioning why we were adding to the total. So one of the reasons we like to do what we're doing is giving everybody confidence on election night. You might be it might be 10:30 and Hennepin's might be in, but one of ours, they're not going to change. And our goal is what you see on election night is audited and ready to go. So when it's at the abstract, at the canvassing board, it's going to be the same result you see. It's going to shift a little because, there's always, now we accept ballots until 8 o'clock. That was just planned. So result reporting is actually going to be delayed even later now because now we have to count ballots right up until 8 p.m. that come into our office. If we get a batch of 1,000 at 8 p.m., it's going to take some time to count those. So I kind of went away from your answer, but yes, that's why we're about an hour later than our colleagues, is because we're physically transferring. And again, the clerks helped make that decision in 2015 alongside the county. So, and then once
Excuse me, David, I have a question for you.
It's not so much a question as it is a comment. There have been a lot of changes that have been made in your office as far as security and things, and I just want to commend you for what you've brought to us and the steps that we've taken, because I remember an issue with Maplewood and trying to sort things out, and when it actually changed the outcome of an election.
One vote.
And so talk about emotional things going back and forth and questions that took place. But we took that very, very seriously. And I don't even know all of the different changes that took place, just to make sure that we had the double, triple check. And it was an unusual, I mean, it wasn't something that happened before that, or I mean, it was just very weird is really what it came down to. I don't know if that's a technical term for when something doesn't work the right way, but we took it very seriously. I mean, and I know that you do all of this, but sometimes people just take it for granted, and I want you to know that we don't take it for granted, and the work that you did was appreciated.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. I think Maplewood, that's a great example. That came down to like one vote. It had flipped from election night because one vote in an audit, you get a voter who was issued the wrong ballot at early voting. There's your one vote. That's wrong. And that event actually did spark a lot of changes. And actually, I think it gave a lot of confidence to who's now the mayor. I think it was a city council race at the time. It gave a lot of confidence because of all of the review and all the auditing, all the documents we had to really make sure we had the accurate result. We were able to build off that and apply what we learned there to a lot of our other processes. So, so thank you. I'm glad you've seen that.
Now that it was brought up, how many spoiled ballots of any type do we get in the last couple of elections?
Commissioner Ortega, how many spoiled ballots? I don't know the exact number percentage-wise. I could follow up with exacts because we do have to report it. I bet it's less than 1% of all voted ballots. Geez, probably even half of 1%. Polling places have about 1,500 to 2,000 voters a polling place. We maybe get 10. Certain elections you'll get more, so like ranked voting in St. Paul, you'll generally get more as voters learn how to rank their candidates. But that might have even gone down. But if you would like the exact data, we can provide it. But I'd say, 10 to 20 per polling place. Actually, where you see a lot of more spoiled ballots is in the primaries, because you can only vote for one party, but all parties are on it. So you get voters, I'll vote Republican for U.S. Senate and Democrat for president, and then that ballot is rejected, and the voter has to recast it. So, but a spoiled ballot doesn't mean an unvoted ballot. Usually the voter got a new ballot and was able to still cast it. A spoiled ballot means they just made a mistake on it, or the ballot was just not being able to be read by the ballot counter. Or the voter just marked the wrong candidate and said, hey, I didn't mean to vote for that person. Can I
How about how many invalid ballots?
I could, invalid ballots, I don't know that number off the top of my head. It is a data point we track, very low percentage, probably even lower than spoiled. But I don't have it off the top of my head, so I don't want to give you a wrong number here while I'm on record. But definitely if you have Ken reach out, I can get you that information.
Thank you, May.
Yeah, I would be interested to see in the data about the primary voting, about how many spoiled ballots we get there. And my other question is this like standard, like required by the state? Like could the parties, like for the primary ballots, could it be like color coded or something to say if you vote, like you can only vote in this color, choose one color column?
Yeah, Commissioner Zhang, it is in state law how that is written. With 50 states, you have 50 good examples. And so I'm sure there are some states that have found a way to design the ballot to limit voters from doing that. But yeah, in our state where it's technically, we don't track your political party, we do in the presidential primaries now. But some states, Virginia, you have to say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, and that's part of your voter registration record. We don't have that in Minnesota, but as a result, our ballot has to have both parties. And so voters, it's on the ballot. Election judges are instructed when they issue your ballot to have a list of things they're supposed to tell you for a primary. That's one thing they tell you. But if you're excited for candidates in both political parties, your ballot unfortunately won't get counted in a primary. But there could be some additional ways too we could inform the public. Luckily though, if you're voting in person, the ballot counter will reject that, and I'll get to this in a minute, and you can fix that. But if you vote through the mail, you don't get that benefit and your ballot would just not be counted.
Yeah, I would just share that the experience that I had was just, it was difficult to explain to folks, especially as they were excited about candidates in both parties.
Yeah.
And it was just challenge for, like what folks thought was that they couldn't vote for one person because of another, or they thought that they could vote for both, in both parties. And that was the issue. And I was just thinking about more creative ways in which we can communicate that clearly with, especially with English as second language learners.
Yeah, and especially when you have voters who need language assistance or any assistance, that messaging now has to get, make sure that it's translatable or transferred to the voter correctly. So yeah, any examples or things you want to provide us would be welcomed. I know you, in the past, your role, you've been involved in elections, so any feedback, I know the staff here in the elections office is watching as well, so noted, and we can work on that messaging for sure.
Thank you.
Victoria?
And I just want to go back because you made a very important point that I want to make sure people heard, and that is a spoiled ballot doesn't mean it's uncounted. A spoiled ballot can be that you made a mistake and you get it, it's rejected, and if you're in person. But it would be interesting, I think, and I think, what did the word that you used, invalid, how many ballots are cast, and that would generally be not in person, because they would be caught by the ballot counter if they were in person, that end up not being counted or invalid, or however you want to, whatever you want to call it. But spoiled ballots doesn't mean it wasn't counted. It means they got a different ballot, which could mean a number of different things.
Commissioner Reinhardt, Commissioner Ortega, the term we're looking for is an undervote. And that is a data point we collect, and that would mean the voter either didn't vote for that office or ran a ballot through and it wasn't counted. And usually that's because either it was left blank or the voter mismarked it, it got rejected, and the voter left the polling place, and the judges, then they just run the ballot. And the machine will count the ballot, but it won't count the votes that were improperly cast. And the voting system is designed to do that. And it's tested and certified to do that. But the undervotes is a data point I could provide you if you're interested.
So if somebody casts a ballot and one vote is somehow not, for a person, was not done properly, do the rest of the votes count, or does the whole ballot get thrown out?
Commissioner Reinhardt, yes, the rest of the ballot votes are counted. So for example, if I like both you and Commissioner McGuire, you're never going to run against either, but I vote for both of you on a ballot, that ballot would get rejected by the ballot counter. But let's say I wasn't there to correct it. The judges would override, it's called override, they put in a code, run the ballot through, the machine will count all the other races that you've properly marked, and the ones where you've either double voted or triple voted, it won't count those. And there's a testing called logic and accuracy testing that must be performed on all the voting systems before they get deployed. That logic and accuracy testing does account for those scenarios. And every year we test our voting system to make sure it's not counting invalid votes.
And just as a follow-up, so that people don't think that they would get a ballot that would have both Commissioner McGuire's name and mine on it, the ballots are also tested ahead of time to make sure that you couldn't vote.
Correct.
You could vote for more than one person, which would be invalid, or an undercount. But yeah, we wouldn't be on the same ballot. So,
Commissioner, probably a bad example, but you two are in front of me, and I figured I'd go.
thank you.
So once the clerk delivers their results to the auditor, then the auditor, we have to report to the Secretary of State. And that's where most of you are probably hitting refresh when you're looking at your results or any of your colleagues' results. We're only required to report to the Secretary of State's office in state election years. On local elections, we could just put the results on our website and be done. Or we could do nothing and just wait till the abstract. Obviously, we're not going to do that. In Ramsey County, we report to the Secretary of State's office every election, regardless of if it's school district or if it's the president. Voters know to go there. They know where to look. It's easy for us to put that link on our website. And so we report to the Secretary of State for every election, but you don't technically need to unless it's a state election. We do electronically report our results to the state, though. So where you hear non-network, the auditors drive them to us, we do electronically report to the state. And we do that about 3 or 4 times on a night. What you're not seeing is how do we do it at Ramsey County? So all the auditors are reporting to the state at night, and most of them are electronically sending the results just like us. I'm not going to get into all the steps because we could be here for another hour or two, but on our website we have a link about why we're reporting, how we're reporting. I know in years past this has been tweeted out, a day or two before the election, and I believe it's also been part of your packet, your media packet that week before that you get with all the media. We'll make sure, again, you're provided this information, a couple weeks before the election so you and your teams are aware of how we report, but the public can go here too.
Excuse me, David,
yeah.
Victoria.
Okay, you've talked a couple of times about the hand delivering of the results on election night. And one of the questions that I'm sure will come up from folks is, well, how do we know something's not been tampered with? Or what if there's an accident? What if, something happens to those results? All of the information is still in the machines, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, and heaven forbid something like that would happen. But I know that you talked about the actual, that thing that you smash with a hammer. I don't know, I can't get that out of my brain. But anyway, that is sealed and everybody has to sign off on it, so that can't be tampered with. But tell me a little bit more about, and by saying me, I mean the people that are listening to this and trying to figure out, okay, what happens? Okay, you get in a car, what's secure about that?
Yeah, great question, Commissioner. There's a chain of custody, and that chain of custody has rules for where if it's broken, what do you do? So on election night, the judges, once 8 p.m. comes and all the voters in the polling place have voted, the judges close out the ballot counter. The ballot counter will print out a result tape. And the judges have some auditing. We had 500 people check in. We have 500 ballots. We have 500 votes on the total machine. And then what the judges do is they sign off on that tape. And they're required to print 3 copies of that tape. 1 copy for the auditor, 1 copy for the municipal clerk, 1 copy for the Secretary of State. And then in school district years, they print a copy for the school district clerk. We also do 1 copy that's left at the polling place. And actually, the official results are not what's on this memory card. It's the signed tape from those election judges. And so that signed tape, we leave 1 at the polling place, 1 gets left with the clerk, 1 gets left with us, and then 1 we deliver to the Secretary of State. So ultimately, if this memory card doesn't get back to our office, that tape is what the official result is on. That's signed. You'll hear Secretary of State's current past ones say, our elections are certified by 20,000 election judges. That's because at the end of the day, all those tapes probably have about 20,000 signatures statewide on them from every polling place. So we have security procedures. If the judge doesn't make it back to our office, unfortunately, that has happened with 165 polling places. That's 165 cars making deliveries. You are going to have processes in place, unfortunately, for the judges who can't make it back to our office on election. It doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened, and we have processes in place to retrieve those materials. You also have the ballots. The ballots, as Commissioner Ortega said, are the ultimate data source. You can go back to them, you can hand them. You don't need a voting system. If the voting system, were to go away, you could go back to the ballots at the end of the day, and that's really the secure check. But state law does say from the polling place, everything gets signed and sealed, and those seals have ID numbers on them, and we track that number the whole way. The seals can't be broken. This is all in state law, so all counties across the state are following this process. And when it gets back to the auditor's office, we're the last check on that seal before we open it up and go ahead and report those results. And that's always done by 2 judges of different political parties. So even in our office on election night, the people opening all those things at the last step of the chain of custody is a Republican and a Democrat election judge from Ramsey County. So 2 election judges of both political parties are overseeing this whole process too. All our clerks, because they have contracts with us, most deliveries are actually coming straight to our office because we have the contract. The only cities that it goes to the clerk and then to us are Lauderdale and Maplewood. Okay, so how do we...
Excuse me, David, Ryan?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll just add, too, for anyone who's skeptical about how the system works, sign up to be an election judge on election night, and you'll see how the system works firsthand, and you will see both how elegantly complex and simple it is all at the same time in terms of assuring chains of custody, repeatable process across 100. And so I would just say, too, that's my other hope is that anyone who has questions about how it works, we would love to have you volunteer as a part of the process. It is the best way to both, A, help us administer our elections, and B, see for yourself exactly how it works.
Victoria?
Well, and on that point also, people seem to think, I've heard this, well, you pack the election judges with Democrats or Republicans, whichever, and the fact is you go through an excruciatingly detailed process to make sure that the election judges are not of more of one party than another, and so it's, I think, incredibly detailed, and that's why I think we have such confidence in our election systems. I do have one question about when we have recognize third parties on the ballot, do you have to then also have someone from the third party?
Commissioner Reinhardt, no. State law says major political parties, and right now Minnesota has 3 major political parties. So if you were from one of those 3 parties, we have to have 2. In local elections, so St. Paul City Council, those are technically nonpartisan offices, then the candidate can have a representative as part of those events. But at the polling places, it is Democrats, Republicans, and the Legal Marijuana Now party, I believe. One of the 2 weed parties, excuse me, I don't know them off the top of my head. And then all other election judges have to be unaffiliated. And if you're unaffiliated, there's certain tasks you cannot perform. One of them is assisting voters. So state law also has the political parties provide us a list of folks who want to act as election judges. But to county managers' comment, I think if you have concerns with what we're doing, come join us. As long as you're 18, able to vote, you can serve as an election judge in Ramsey County, and we're always looking for more people. So we require about 2,000 election judges annually. So.
Trista?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ortega. I'm just curious, so the 3 recognized political parties, so one of them, obviously, how does the Democrats, Republicans have been around for a long time, how does that other one set? And is it based on the last election and the number of ballots? And so now that they've accomplished their mission based on their name, do they stay on for this year as a 3rd recognized party, or like how does that work?
Yeah, Commissioner Manscastille,
Yeah.
you have to receive a candidate from your party has to receive 5% of the vote in a statewide office. Okay. So what was it, 2018? I think, again, excuse me, I can't remember the 2 political parties, but one of the parties had a candidate for attorney general. The other party might have had a candidate for state auditor who received that 5%. Then you're a major party for the next 4 years. So that would be the 2022 election. I think we eliminated it down to 3 parties. But you have to have a candidate who receives 5% of the vote to be considered a state major party, and that's in state law.
Got it. Thanks.
Great, so back to how do we report results at Ramsey County. So again, really I have the detailed timeline. You can click the link on our website, but the real high level election results from the polling places and the ballot boards are physically delivered to the city clerks once the election judges have audited them, sealed them, done their chain of custody. And then they're either delivered to the city clerk or the auditor. I put the auditor because, again, our cities that have contracts, they just drive their results right to us. Step 2, the city clerks deliver to us. And then step 3, the results are audited for discrepancies. So again, if you're in the elections office, the election judges are giving us the ballots, which we can't unseal. The ballots stay sealed unless there's a recount or an election contest. So they're taking the tapes, the signatures, the journals from all of the events that happen on election day, and making sure that we had 100 voters, we're reporting 100 votes. And that audit is pretty quick, but we want to do that audit before we report our results, because in the past, there have been discrepancies reported because there wasn't an audit in place. And again, our staff, generally it's about 5 to 10 minutes to do an audit. Then we report our results electronically to the Secretary of State, and our service team's controller will then look at those results online and make sure they match what our system says. So we're actually doing 3 checks on election night, 2 before they get reported and 1 after they get reported. And for the issue we had in 2018 in Roseville, that was one of our resolutions, is we're auditing the results twice before they go up, once after they're up, and I don't leave until the controller gives me the thumbs up that all the results on our website match what the tape said from the polling place. And that, again, was put in place in 2018 as a result of some of the errors we had in Roseville and the audit we conducted on our voting system. And at that point, the results are on the website. And we, again, as I told you earlier, we don't want them to change. The result that we put out first, that's what voters have confidence in. My experience, when those change, you start hearing from candidates and voters very quickly, even if they just change by a couple. So our goal, again, is to get everything reported on election night. We're getting towards the end here, but real quickly, what are the benefits of a voting system? Well, it's accurate and quick. It can count 100 ballots in a minute, something like that. But I think the main benefit is it rejects mismarked ballots. It gives the opportunity to the voter to fix their mistake. If you were just hand counting, it would be up to the hand counting to determine your intent. You should determine your intent. So ballot counter will reject your ballot and you can mismark. I've given an example for those of you who were around in the 2008 election. There's a ballot that would have been rejected by the ballot counter, and that voter would have had an opportunity to remark that ballot. You get accessibility options. We have the touch writer as our accessible device. It's got a braille pad. It's got different definitions. You can enlarge the font, reduce the font. You can listen to the ballot. If you didn't have a voting system, you wouldn't have the accessibility options. I think our next firmware for our voting system will give us language options, so we could even maybe have it written in Hmong, Spanish, French. We don't have that now, but if we didn't have the voting system, we would never have that technology. So accessible options are a benefit of the voting system. You get timely, unofficial, and unaudited results. Again, the voting system is all unofficial results. You get a lot of post-election data. The cast vote record is kind of the new one you hear a lot about. You get that from the voting system. And then it brings consistency across the state. Every county in the state is using a voting system, and so by us using a voting system, it's that consistency across the state. So voters, regardless of where they are in the state of Minnesota, get treated the same. What are the risks of a voting system? Well, you got to rely on a private vendor. Like I said, we have some really good tech entrepreneurs here in Ramsey County, but we have to buy a certified system, and right now the certified systems are from Austin, Texas, Omaha, Nebraska, and I believe Toronto, Canada. So right now we don't have a local vendor. We got to rely on private vendors. Technical expertise is required. As I said, we have a staff person devoted to this task. They need to know how to, basically be a software person. They've got to design a ballot. They've got to report results. They've got to manipulate data, because the way the state accepts results is a different coding than how our voting system talks. So you've got to make sure the data gets transferred to them correctly. Any digital system, you're prone to hacking, denial of service, firmware and updates. Technology can go bad. So we have about 5 to 10 ballot counters that just fail because either the truckers dropped them, or it just, like any technology, it gets old over time. So we have to replace our technology. And then I put the same thing here. These results are timely, but they're unofficial and unaudited. So a benefit of the voting system is you get quick unaudited results. A risk of the voting system is you get quick unaudited results. Just again, aware that the voting system results are unofficial. What's official is when you do that canvass 3 to 10 days later. The picture here, that's Harris County. For those of you know, that's Houston, one of the biggest cities in the country. Their warehouse in 2010 burnt down about 2 weeks before the election, and they lost all their voting equipment. So again, just the risk of voting equipment, it's hardware. It can go away. And so Houston is a good example of how to recover from losing all your voting system. But it's also an example that you've got to make sure, like, we have, tarps. So if we have a fire, the sprinklers go off, they don't ruin our voting system, and we can keep it protected for a while. So we have learned from other counties across this country from how to...
Excuse me, hold on. Excuse me, David, on the hacking, give me examples.
Good question, Commissioner.
Could you put that screen back on? I had a couple of questions. Go ahead.
Great. One of the reasons, Commissioner, the task force in 2015 wanted a non-networked system is it would eliminate hacking. So I don't have an example of hacking of a voting system that I'm aware of, but a good example I could provide you that the public could think of the voting system. One of the things our IS security team works on election night is to make sure that our website hasn't been defaced. And so that public would go to our website, they would see results, but it would actually be a fake website, and that they would just mimic our website. So I think there was an example where it would say, Democrats vote Tuesday, Republicans vote Wednesday. And you would confuse the voters, and it wouldn't be our website, it would be a defaced version of our website. So that could be an example where someone could hack into our network, manipulate the information on our website, and either confuse voters or give voters inaccurate information. Our IS security teams have, again, they can speak to this. I am not an IS security expert, but they have a lot of resources in place to monitor that and ensure that our website is accurate on election night and through the whole election process. So that would be an example of hacking.
So the other question is, you made a comment that we have different systems coming to the state, so there's no common. Repeat that again.
Yeah, so Commissioner, on election night, when we send our results to the Secretary of State, it's a 32-digit code. And if I were to give you that code, the first 2 digits are the county, the second 3 digits are the city, the third 3 digits are the office, and then the last 2 digits are the results. So if you have that 32-digit code, you can actually see the result for each candidate in each office. We have to send that code to the Secretary of State's office, so then on their website, it can put all the results in the right place. And we do a lot of testing in the weeks up. We actually send them a lot of fake data to make sure it's uploading correctly. How the systems shake hands with the state, it's different file types. So ES&S is a slightly different file type than the HART system we use. Our file type is slightly different than the Dominion, and we have a converter. It's a software converter that takes our data from the HART system, puts it into that 32-digit code, and then sends it to the Secretary of State. That was actually the issue in 2018, that converter didn't work right, and we didn't have an audit to make sure that the conversion was right. Now we have multiple audits to make sure that the conversion of data is right. The Secretary of State is very well aware of these limitations with its users, but has worked with us to make sure that that data gets manipulated into that 32-digit code that gets sent to the state. And then it's a 34-digit code for absentee voting. It puts 2 digits at the end for absentee ballots.
So let me ask you a question. Wouldn't it make common sense for a statewide, why have so many vendors with different codings in a sense? Wouldn't it make more sense for the state to have one uniform system?
Commissioner Ortega, there are examples, Oklahoma, Hawaii, a few other states that do have statewide, Alaska, Maine, that do have statewide systems. Again, that would be a legislative issue that the legislature determined. I don't know the reasoning, but I think some of the reasoning is elections are locally administered. And one of the checks to make sure that you have secure elections is they're decentralized. So you have, again, 20,000
You could
people.
still have it decentralized. I'm talking about the mechanism of reporting the data.
I'm going to, Commissioner Ortega, I'll default to the legislature on if we should have one system or many. But right now in Minnesota, they've allowed the counties to determine what system they should use. And they've said right now that's a county's decision.
I understand that.
So right now it's a
The
county
more
decision.
seamless you make it, the less mistakes, right?
Commissioner Ortega, I'm trying to not disagree with you because I do agree with you, but that's the authority of the legislature. They've right now said we're going to have multiple systems. I will give you some context, though. 75 counties, I think, use ES&S, and the state systems are much more designed to work with those systems. So to your point, yeah, there would be some benefits to having a statewide system, but that's a political issue, and I'm kind of staying away from that one. I'll let the legislature decide that. But there are states that are examples, to your point, that have statewide systems.
Well, that's why you have your job. You're smart enough to stay out of it. You had your hand up.
No,
Oh,
you can
okay.
cover it.
All right, go ahead,
I
David.
think we're coming to the end here. Yeah, replacement plan. And so that's one of the reasons we're here today, too, is a voting system doesn't last forever. Historically, in my experience of 20 years, our voting systems last for being 10 to 12 years, and then they need to be replaced. With the new systems, though, we're also seeing, like with the ES&S system, they're replacing components, not the whole system. So as I said, our contract expires at the end of 2025. We need to replace the system in late 25 or early 2026. And it's going to cost between $5 to $6 million to purchase a new system. That's just what we're seeing with other purchases being made right now. Currently, our local, I've talked to Dakota, Washington, and Hennepin. They're not looking to replace their systems, but when I called my colleagues over there, they all basically said, yeah, but we're going to start thinking about it. We don't have a plan of it. And that makes sense. Most people purchased between 2015 and 2020. So most systems aren't, we're going to be probably one of the first counties coming up for replacement. But you'll see more counties coming up. In greater Minnesota, there's probably a lot of counties up for replacement because I know a lot of them have not replaced due to funding, and the legislature did allocate some funding, so I could see more counties beginning to replace their older systems.
So, David, let me ask you another question here. Would it then, as we move forward, does it make more sense for Ramsey County to have a system rather than watching what Hennepin does, but saying there are 75, 80 counties that have this system, and that's the system the state is favoring?
Yeah, Commissioner Ortega, if you were to...
And wouldn't it make more sense that we then go with that system?
Commissioner Ortega, yes. I'll let the task force decide that in the purchasing. There's procurement roles and RFPs, and we would want the input from our voters and input from our clerks. But to a high level, you do get some benefits as administrators from being on the same system. It's as simple as our staff person in the elections office can call their colleague in Hennepin and say, hey, I'm having issues with this header on the ballot. How did you work out? So you get more colleagues doing the same thing you do. And so, yes, there definitely could be benefits to that. That's one of the things the task force will definitely want to consider as we go forward with this new purchase. And something we'll talk with you all, because at the end of the day, we have to come to you to approve this contract too. So you'll definitely have some more input on what this voting system will look like and how we operate. I think that's a really good point, Commissioner.
Trista?
Similar on the voting system thing, so even if it's the preferred voting system, are there different features of that voter system that can be tailored to us as a county? And I'm really specifically thinking of, as we engage communities, especially communities that might be first-time voters or have language barriers, like if there's any other features of the system that could be used or tracked or used for data or anything, just like when you buy software, it's like, here's the package and you can turn on these features.
Yeah, Commissioner Mascastito, as far as I'm aware, there's not like a la carte.
Okay.
But that would be something we would want to put in RFP. So unique to Ramsey County is our Section 203 requirement of the Voting Rights Act to provide language in Hmong for all voting. And yeah, we'd want that in our RFP to make sure a vendor could do that. Now I know Hart, our current vendor, is doing this in LA County right now, and has said the next firmware for Minnesota, which I think we're getting next year, should have that in it. But yeah, certainly we could add that to our request for proposals on a voting system, those things unique to Ramsey County. To Commissioner Ortega's point, our needs in Ramsey County might be very different than the needs in greater Minnesota. But I think we also need to work with the voting systems to make a system that works for Ramsey County and also works for Blue Earth County. Because as of now, if you were to look at our system, we can fit all of ours on a few shelves. The ES&S system, they're huge trash, they're like a big trash can, and it takes a huge warehouse. So the decisions for the system also were based on how much warehouse space do we have. A lot of different factors, but we could include a factor that are important to Ramsey County in our proposals and let the vendor tell us why they can't do it.
Okay. Ryan?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And to that end, Dave, I think that is why the task force is important. That's why the board helping lay out criteria will be important to evaluate, because the counter, I understand the efficiency arguments, and we've actually been frustrated many times by not being on the most seamless integration with the state system and have had to deal with things, and Dave gets questions from me on it. The counter is Ramsey County is a bit unique when we think about who votes and who lives in our community, and that maybe one of these other voting systems is at a further end on that. LA County is a great example to raise for that reason. And so we're going to make sure, I actually think of the process of procurement to be very similar to like the health insurance procurement, where it's multifaceted and complex. We work very hard to set clear criteria at the outset, and then this task force helps us to work through that and make sure they're the right ones. And that's my biggest thing is, we're not talking a lot about it today, but we did evaluate last year what it would cost to have implemented earlier or changed our current system because of the challenges on reporting election night results, and it's millions. And it's like, it doesn't make sense to spend millions before you get 3 years from now to a full overhaul of the system. And so I just wanted everyone to know we did look into that because it is frustrating, and you'll all be frustrated again on election night a few more times, and we'll continue to have our support group that we get in a little bit later on our timelines, but we're going to hang in there for a couple more years.
Well, I just want to say, and I don't disagree with you, I'm just trying to get to the point that, we're not changing the system for the better necessarily. If we're reacting to, if a statewide system is a better deal for every voter in the state, then we shouldn't throw that out just because it doesn't fit. Really, the vendors are the ones that need, we are the customers. And we need to flip that around and not just, the vendor says, well, here's what we could do. Well, that's not good enough, right? Because we're talking big money. I think they would react to that.
Commissioner Ortega, I think you nailed it. You hit it perfectly. The reason the task force selected the last vendor is they were responsive to what we wanted. They provided a lot of responses to RFP that other vendors didn't because of that. But we do purchase off statewide contracts, and I think there is a lot of benefit to uniforming this statewide, especially for smaller counties who don't have the technical staff that we have. They rely on the vendors and the state a lot. We're lucky here to be a good county that is well-funded, and we can have that technical expertise in our office, but not all counties are fortunate enough to have that and could rely on a statewide system.
Victoria?
Well, and I think at times also the state has come up with funding or other funding sources so that it's not all on the counties. And I know when we made one decision, I can't remember which time it was that we did that, but it was, okay, there's funding available. Let's do this now. But I think as far as, I agree that, you know, having one system statewide would be better. But I do think that if there's something that we really need and they don't offer, then we have to rethink it. Because does the benefit, and I think that's what they did the last time, the task force did the last time. It was like, we're gonna weigh this and figure out what makes the most sense, and chose what they thought, and of course the county board, we approved it. So it does have to meet our needs. And I would think that at this point, with the technology improvements that have been made, if a vendor can't meet our needs, then there's something wrong. Because there's very little that can't be done right now, which is one of the reasons it's a little scary. But regardless, they have to be able to meet our needs.
And Commissioners, that's a good point. As we look at replacement, we need to look at the support we're going to get from the vendor.
Yeah.
Right now, we're one of 3 counties who uses HART. We get good support by the vendor, but I think in a market economy, they could ignore us when you're just 3 of 87 counties using their system. And so part of it is we want to make sure we get support from the vendor, that they're not just going to make the sale and then move to Wisconsin and focus on them. And historically, our current vendor has given us support up to our expectations and even beyond at times. So. So funding for the new voting system, again, historically half will come from the county. That's just because we own the spare equipment, we own the software, but we don't own the election day hardware. And generally it's about 50-50 between us and our cities. I actually meet with our cities next week for our annual election meeting. We meet with our cities once to twice a year. We legally have to meet with them ahead of every election, but we meet with them more regularly too. So on the June 26th meeting, one of our topics is going to be to start teeing up this conversation and getting the next steps. We're also going to be talking about what we want the task force to look like for the next purchase. How do we want that team to look like? What do we want them to do? What are some of the goals of that team? And then that task force will also help draft the next joint powers agreement to manage the voting system. So all that stuff is getting started. And what are our next steps? Okay, I already said the next step. That's our meeting with our cities next week. Then we're going to be working to determine our county's funding source. As I said, I think we went to CPAC and asked for a request from them. We're looking at our budget. There's also some legislative funds that have been made available, and we're meeting with the state, has their statewide meeting, I think on the 22nd, so this Thursday, Wednesday, it's on my calendar. And we'll be getting a lot more information about what funds are available, but we do know there'll be some funds available for the equipment. And then we're going to continue to evaluate how we operate our system. Meetings like this are helpful to kind of hear what you all, your expectations for the system are. But we're going to continue to evaluate how we operate our reporting on our results, providing accessibility, public transparency, and system security. Those last two are really important with a digital system. Public transparency, we get a lot of requests for how do you trust how the voting system works. And there are events in place, but I think with any technology, like myself, I'm not very tech savvy, and so it's hard to provide transparency to technology, and we do have systems in place to provide that, but we want to continue working towards transparency to our public so everybody, at the end of the night, can trust the vote totals that they see. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate these workshops, and I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Hold on, David.
Yeah.
May?
Yes, I have a question about the early voting applications or the early voting ballots. So like if they received it, I believe there's a deadline for them to turn it in by like about 3 o'clock. Is that a policy that we create, or is that a policy by the state?
Commissioner Jung, that's a state law, and that state law was actually changed now till 8 o'clock. It was 3 o'clock. If you had a mail ballot, you could deliver it to our office by 3 o'clock on Election Day. The new law that was passed at this previous legislature now extended that to 8 p.m. Per this conversation, the results might be a little delayed now, because if we get a lot of voters waiting till 8 o'clock, that ballot has to get delivered to the ballot board, accepted and rejected, and then counted. And so we are expecting a slight delay on our results because of that 8 p.m. But it's a benefit to the voters. If you're still sitting on your ballot at 5 p.m., you can get it down to the auditor office, and it will still get counted.
And are we implementing that this year?
Yes, I'm being told that 2023 it's implemented. State law, they implemented some things in 2024, some in 2023, and there was a lot of changes. So I'm still getting comments, but yeah, that one's in 2023.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome, Commissioner.
Well, go ahead.
But again, the mail-in vote, and we also have early voting, which is different in person, and you've got so many different titles for different things, and it's like, if people say that they don't have the opportunity to vote, then they're not looking very hard.
Thank you, David and Tracy, for a very good presentation. I know we've been doing this since about 2018, every year coming back and sort of working it, which is critical, because I think people need to understand, no matter what we do, there are skeptics out there, and that's why we need to keep talking about, how do we improve the system and why it works, because that's the only way to deal with it. I wish they would all volunteer, but they don't want to volunteer. They just want to be skeptics. So I think this is an important workshop, and thank you. And thank you to Deputy Karen Francois. I don't know if she's still on, but
She is, we were just texting.
Oh,
go ahead, Karen.
I am still here. Thank you so much. And thanks to Tracy and Dave. Dave is probably one of the most knowledgeable elections officials probably in the state of Minnesota, and we are so grateful and blessed to have him on our team. Thanks to everyone for listening and all of your great questions, and we look forward to coming back with more updates. Thank you all.
Thank you, Karen. We are now adjourned.